So you want to know the story of Stiff Little Fingers? We'll tell you the story. Started back in the 70s. Remember that? Punk rock and all that? Sex Pistols singing about anarchy in the UK. Clash singing London's Burning. We grew up in Belfast through the Troubles. We lived it. This is our story.
Although we were specifically a Northern Ireland band singing Northern Ireland songs, I think the message is universal.
It came from the attitude and the soul, that's what it's about.
They can play to 2,000 people in a night, and every one of them know every word of every song. And 50% of them doubtless will be tattooed with the band's name somewhere on them.
It's the music that stands up, and if the music still stands up and the band are still good live and still believe in it, people will go and see them.
Quite a few, 20, 30-year-olds there who are seeing where, I guess, bands like Green Day and so on, by their own admission, get their influences from.
For my money, they're working class heroes.
The songs actually mean something. It's more than just ego and selling records.
We like to think we live in a fair and just society, so we can still lock a man away for 19 years, having denied him the use of witness statements that might have cleared his name. Do we call that justice? Not in my eyes.
You're looking for something, what could that be?
I think I was 11 years old when the Troubles started in Belfast, and to be honest, at the time it just felt like a game that people played on the street.
We're talking about really the height of the Troubles, the really dark days, early 70s.
And you spent the last 10 years of your life in this emergency.
I particularly remember during the summer holidays, sitting on the curbside with a local newspaper spread out. It was because it had photographs of people petrol bombing crowds and throwing stones and stuff like that.
You went to school in your own local area, you mixed with the people in your own local area, and people really didn't cross what I suppose you would call the sectarian divide.
I mean, this was happening probably about a mile away from where I lived at the time, and you don't realise until that mile gets eaten up that it's not a game and it's not a bundle of laughs.
Try to break down the imaginary wall, and if you couldn't be bothered, well then my friend you'll fall.
Some guys ended up dead, unfortunately. Some guys ended up in organisations, in the UDA and the UVF or whatever. Some guys strangely ended up in the police. So out of our friends, half seem to be in an organisation and half seem to be in the police, fighting them.
barricades around everything, and it's hard for people nowadays to imagine it, but having said that, that's just the way it was at the time.
I had no idea of the cultural and the social significance of what was happening until I was much older.
It's as simple as this. When the jam got big, do you remember in England you had red, white and blue jam shoes? In Northern Ireland you could buy red, white and blue jam shoes, and you could buy green, white and gold jam shoes. That's how polarised the community was.
We always felt that we were in quite a backwater, you know, culturally. There were no bands that came to Belfast. At the time they literally thought that they would be flying into a Beirut situation. And fair to say, you know, musicians have been targeted there.
When we first went over, the Miami show band, some kind of show band, had been shot that week. You know, they'd been stopped in a car and hauled out of the car, and they'd all got shot on the roadside.
Never asked us if we want a war. What do you think they're talking for? And we never give no say. We have to do things all the way. I said, oh, we want no more of that. You can't push us under the mat. Oh, we want no more of that.
I was a shit footballer. I was reasonably intelligent, but not that smart. I turned out to be a half-decent guitar player.
The story began at school, at the Boys Model, up Ballysilne, North Belfast.
I was forever like dragging schoolmates into, let's form a band, you know, you can play the bass, let's be in a band, you know. And
None of us had played instruments. I was asked to play drums, never hit a drum in my life. So it really all kicked off from there.
Someone else will pull the trigger for him. I said, whoa, we want no more of that. You can't push us under the mat. Oh, we want no more of that.
I was probably about the 15th group I was in my head. But that's because I always wanted to be in a band. It's like I never wanted to be, as much as I wanted to be Rory Gallagher when I looked at him, I didn't actually want to be that guy on his own.
And Highway Star comprised of Jake Burns, Henry Clooney, Brian Falloon and Gordon Blair.
Our heroes would have been the kind of metal bands, the Led Zeppelins, Deep Purples, Sabbath and so on. That we were listening to that, a lot of blues, Allman Brothers. So basically if you were going to do anything and try and get a gig, you had to be a covers band, really.
I remember memorably playing one bar in Carrickfergus where they thought we were a country and western act.
I had stumbled across Highway Star by accident. We went up to see the Pink Fairies up at Queen's University, and the support band was Highway Star, who, to be quite honest, were a terrible long-haired boogie band.
So when the punk scene finally broke, I suppose it was an absolute godsend for us. You know, we then had music of our own age, of our own era, and of a type we really liked. It was raw. We were raw, so it kind of fitted the bill for us.
It was when I heard the first Clash album that I suddenly was pulled up short and thought, shit, this is fucking real. I mean, these guys aren't fucking about. And that's when we stopped effectively being Highway Star.
Everybody's down in the center of town, doing nothing wrong, only hanging around. They put you up against the wall, make love a jokes just to make you feel small. They have a joy appearance in the clothes you wear. All that just isn't fair.
So the scene grew out of that. I think my first recollection would be sort of Rudy. Rudy seemed to be the first on the scene doing the thing.
Punk, to me, and what made punk exciting to me was the idea, and the idea that anyone could get up and do anything.
When the Outcasts first started, we thought, we were the only punk band in Belfast. We didn't realise at the same time there was Stiff Little Fingers were going and Rudy were going.
From there just seemed to be a rash of bands just starting up, trying to do their own thing. The Outcasts and then obviously ourselves. There were lots of others who seemed to be around and then just suddenly sprung up at the same time.
Talking about the law and order. We're talking about the order. The law and order. There's no justice in enough.
Our bass player at the time was a guy called Gordon Blair, who quit because he didn't want to play, and I quote, that fucking punk rubbish. Fair enough, he's entitled to his opinion. So off he went, which now left three of us, which, you know, two guitar players and a drummer did not a band make, unless you had the White Stripes seeing double from the drum kit. But we needed a bass player, and a friend of ours said, oh, you're going to play all that fucking punk nonsense? I said, I've got a friend who likes all that crap. I'm sure he'll fit in, and he's got a Marshall amp. Enter Mr. McMorty, and Stiff Little Fingers were born.
Talking about the law and order. We're talking about the order. Law and order. There's no justice in the law and order. We're talking about the order. Law and order. There's no justice in enough. Justice all gone. It's all gone.
We originally called ourselves The Fast, because it seemed appropriate. And we found out there was a band called The Fast who had recorded a track on the Live at CBGB's album. And with the temerity and fucking confidence and cockiness that only comes from being fucking 17, 18 years old, we decided, oh, we can't have the same name as them because it'll clash. There was a Vibrators album, and just looked down the song titles and saw Stiff Little Fingers.
I could be a soldier, go out there, fight to save this land. Be a paper soldier, paramilitary gun in hand. I won't be a soldier, I won't take no orders from no one. Got them fucking armies, this is my idea of fun. They're gonna waste my time, they're gonna waste my life, and they're still learning how.
Like a lot of bands, we were kind of doing our own self-promotion. We were trying to get ourselves known, so we were pestering the local press.
Colin McClelland was our first manager. He was the editor, the entertainment editor of the Sunday News in Belfast at the time, and he became aware of the band because Jake would write to him constantly, inviting him to shows, telling him how brilliant the band was.
I basically wrote these really snotty, cheeky letters. I mean, you know, like I said, it was punk rock. It's what you did, you know. You had no respect for anybody. I seem to recall one of the lines I wrote was, "We're the best thing to happen to music since Van Morrison fucked off."
I'm not gonna be shaking it. They said that because I just can't win. I read that story many times before, but every time I put it out the door. Ho!
Being pestered enough, he came along to one of the first shows and brought another journalist, a friend of his, Gordon Ogilvie.
I remember on the very first night that Colin and I saw them, Colin said to me something like, well, if these guys are a garage band, they've been rehearsing in that garage a long time.
What they wanna waste my life. They wanna waste my time. They wanna waste my life. And they're so
We did the gig. I talked to them afterwards, and they said, you know, got any management, have you? And I thought, Jesus, this has gone up a bit from publicity, hasn't it?
When Gordon Ogilvie came upon the scene, that was the sort of, I suppose that was their stepping stone to success, although people didn't realise it at the time.
Gordon said, so, you know, you've written a couple of songs on your own. Have you written anything about your environment?
It had occurred to me that this was exactly the kind of music that should come out of a background like Northern Ireland.
And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a piece of paper and literally handed me pretty much the finished lyric of Suspect Device. And it was one of those moments in your life when, like, you know, you see on those old 60s TV programs like The Time Tunnel, where like the room suddenly goes all liquefied and spins around you. That's exactly what it was like. I sat there in this pub and like everything went it was like my head was underwater, the whole room span. I just saw this piece of paper and thought, fuck, this is fucking amazing. I mean, what I can't do with this. And that's when the whole fucking band changed.
If I'm a material planning in my head, it's a suspect device that's left 2,000 dead. Your solutions are a problem. They put up a wall, one inside time and promise. When should we get fucked off? They play the games of power. They cut and mark the pack. They seal us to the bottom. But what do they put back?
And it was like somebody had put a key in a lock and opened the door and everything came pouring out. And, you know, years and years and years of frustration of what we'd all grown up through all came pouring out thanks to that one piece of paper.
In hindsight, people resented the fact that someone like Gordon Ogilvie was there because they thought he was pulling the strings. And certainly that would have been a very widespread perception at the time.
The closest I'll ever admit to these sort of scurrilous rumours that I was some kind of charlatan Malcolm McLaren figure who manipulated this poor defenceless boy from the back streets of Belfast is that essentially I had the idea, for what I think are good musical, good artistic reasons, if you like, that they should write songs about their lives, which was the horror and the inconvenience and the tedium of the Troubles.
They were born into that sort of an area and they grew up amidst that there, so obviously it was going to influence them.
For Stiff Little Fingers to write about that, you know, was important, you know. And it brought awareness in a different way, in a musical way, you know.
Don't believe them, don't believe them, don't be bitten twice. We got a suspect device.
Colin McClelland left when Gordon stayed on with the band, as you know, to help with the direction and co-lyricist on quite a few songs.
I actually waited at least a week, if not 2 weeks, to go and see him where they rehearse in the church hall. I'm surprised I could wait that long because I was really quite excited. And I walked in and they were sort of hammering away and they stopped and Jake said, "This is Suspect Device," and he played it exactly as you know it. And then he said, "And here's another one I've written, it's called Wasted Life," and they played it exactly as you know it. And at that point I thought, A, this is exciting, B, it has potential, and C, it's serious. I can't muck around with this kid's line. He takes it seriously.
They take away our freedom in the name of liberty. Why can't they all just fuck up? Why can't they let us be? Make us feel indebted for saving us from hell, and then they put us through it. It's time to blast its spell.
Having written these songs, we were then, well, what do we do with them? And Gordon said, well, you know, we're going to have to demo them. Went, okay.
We decided to promote the band that it would be a hoot to send cassette copies of what became the band's first single, Suspect Device, out as a cassette tape made up to look like an incendiary device.
I got hold of a photo of a device which the IRA were using at the time, packing inflammable material in cassette boxes.
You got a suspect device.
Originally Jake was a little bit resistant to the idea. He said, "I don't want people to think they were trying to cash in." I said, "What's to cash in? You know, I mean, classically we always say in interviews, but it's no more than the truth. Do people really think, you know, that Brian Wilson was some kind of ne'er-do-well because he dared to write songs about surfing? He didn't even surf, Brian Wilson, you know."
We got some feedback that some guys actually did put these cassettes in buckets filled with sand, thinking they were the real thing.
Just take a look around you, with the bitterness and spite. Why can't we take over and try
Nobody bit, nobody was interested. So Gordon then turns to me and goes, well, let's put it out ourselves. And I went, can you do that? He said, come on, it's punk rock, mate. Everybody's fucking doing it. Of course we can do it.
I spent something like £300 to have something like 200 records pressed.
We had then to package and ship the thing, so literally a few nights spent in Gordon's flat with several boxes of records, several 100,000 it seemed, although there were probably only hundreds, of pre-printed but not pre-glued sleeves, which literally had to be pasted A to B, C to D, you know.
There's something exciting about that, and you know, it puts a bit of iron in your soul, you know.
And we left a box in a shop on sale or return, and went back a week later and they said, got any more?
One went to John Peel, who played the record something like 10 nights in a row. And I mean, we were astonished, absolutely astonished.
I think he got quite excited about it. And in those days, you know, everybody I knew did listen to John Peel, and that was really the fount of all wisdom and the source of all information.
We then gave the distribution to Rough Trade. We sent the records down to them, or they went straight across from Dublin, and the sleeves came from another direction, and the people at Rough Trade put them together and then farmed them out to their network of independent shops.
Subsequently, we sold a huge amount of them.
We were approached by Ireland, who'd heard the record on Peel and the fact that he was raving about it. And they sent a couple of guys over to Belfast to come see us play, which at the time was a huge thing, because, you know, we were thinking, well, you know, we know from reading the mainstream music press how difficult it is to get A&R people to come to a gig in London. It's damn near impossible to get them to go to a gig in Manchester. How the hell are they going to get them to come to Belfast where they're likely to get fucking shot at, you know?
Record execs never went over there. You know, if they did go to Ireland, it was always Dublin. You know, Belfast wasn't the nicest place on an expense account.
But amazingly, these two guys turned up, and we had to organise this gig specifically for them. We then got a call from Ireland saying, yep, no, two A&R guys think you're great, Ed thinks you're great. We'd like you to come across and record some demo stuff for us.
We really couldn't believe that there was a major label out there that was willing to sign this band from the backwater called Belfast that we'd grown up in.
So they flew us across, put us up in a hotel in Hammersmith. We turned up at their studio in Hammersmith itself, down in the basement there. And we were amazed to find that Ed Hollis was actually producing the fucking demos. Now this is the guy, like I said, he's just had a top 10 single and he's producing our demos? Great, so we thought, yeah, these guys are really serious, you know? About a week or so later, we got a formal offer through. They offered us quite a large amount of money at the time. 3-album deal, you know, pack your bags, quit your jobs, we want you in London.
We had the island deal and we could have just gone in and done it.
Bear in mind at the time, I think the unemployment rate in mainland Britain was 1 in 10. In Northern Ireland it was 1 in 3.
We quit our jobs, we told our mums, this is it, we're leaving, cheerio, tears and all that sort of thing. And then we got word back that the deal had been vetoed.
They hadn't signed their side, so that was us stuck.
Why can't you tell us the truth? Why can't you tell us the truth? Why did you lie to?
I remember phoning Gordon up and saying, you know, well, we've had a talk about it and we've decided we want to carry on. And he just burst out laughing and said, well, what the fuck else are you going to do, you useless fucker? I mean, there's nothing else to do.
Why did you lie to us?
Tom Robinson had been trying to get in touch with us. At the time, the TRB had just had a big hit with 2468 Motorway, and they were about to go out to tour their first album. We explained to him that, look, we don't have a record deal, we can't afford to buy on and stuff. He went, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, we'll pay you 50 quid a night. I know it's not a lot, but it'll cover your petrol and, you know, whatever. And so that was, on the promise of that, we moved across to London.
We went from Belfast to living in one hotel room, 5 or 6 beds in one room, in a damp hotel called the Venus in Westbourne Grove. It's now called something else, and it was pretty grim. I remember there were holes in the wall and shouts and yelling every night, and but you know, you're young, you deal with it.
Gordon had been going to, because he'd moved now from Belfast to London, so he'd been just frequenting the rough trade shop, just buying records basically, and introduced himself to the guys that worked there as the managers to Fill Fingers, and they were like, oh wow, we sell, you know, we sell a lot of that Suspect Device record. And he said, you know, yeah, it's, you know, it's gone really well for the band, and you know, they're coming over to do the Tom Robinson tour and stuff. And they said, oh, when's the next record out?
And I think that they told us they were recording a single, but I think they weren't happy with it, and this was Alternative Ulster.
We did do a demo version of it for Ireland, and they said, well, do you think you could get that?
So I went into Ireland and got the tapes.
And I don't remember money changing hands, but we got it.
Somehow, some kind of foolhardy statement, I said that I would mix it for them. I don't know what possessed me to say that, because I'd never mixed a record in my life before.
And Rough Trade said, okay, well, we'll put it as a single.
And that was really the beginning of our relationship with them, and that became a Rough Trade record.
The move to Rough Trade was, I think, the best thing that happened to us, no doubt about that.
Jeff said, look, we've never made an album before. You've never made an album before. Let's make an album. Once we've recouped whatever it costs to make it, we'll split the profit 50-50.
It didn't seem fair to say, well, you do the work and we'll earn 3 times as much as you, which is what conventional record royalty usually is.
By then, we were on tour with 2 or 3 other acts to do with Rough Trade, which was meant to be one of these sort of portmanteau showcase tours where everybody was equal and we were going to rotate and so forth. But everywhere we went, people were queued round the block, and clubs and small venues who were totally unprepared suddenly had to start building crush barriers as the word got round. When this tour hits town, this is going to be mayhem.
Making an album conceptually was just a matter of thinking about how to record that kind of mighty sound they had live. I mean, why they let us produce them is a really interesting question, and I'd like to know the answer to that.
Once you really believe in something, you just want to do it, don't you?
From a stray bullet.
mean, the thing I enjoyed most about making the record was the fact that it was so fast, and the fact that we managed, in our innocence and naivety, to help capture the energy of the group. And I think almost anybody else would have put in some production techniques which would have softened and blanded out the edges of what they were doing. And I think that's the virtue of our amateur production technique.
Johnny was a good man. Yeah!
It was an exciting thing for us to release an album, and the fact that it sold so many, really, again, it wasn't really in our thinking. I mean, I don't think we were thinking, what is it going to sell? I think we were thinking, is it any good?
It wasn't on general release, it was just a box of albums or whatever sent to each of the indie stores in this loose framework of around the country that Rough Trade had.
It started selling hand over fist, to the point that amazingly on my 21st birthday, it was the highest new entry in the album chart. And it was the first time that a completely independent album had ever cracked the album chart.
Take it down!
The BMRB thought it was hyped into the charts because they'd never heard of anything like this happening before, and promptly threw it out. Of course, whenever the sales continued, it went back in up to, I think it was like number 15.
All of a sudden they're on TV, they're on the radio, and you can't help yourself. Like, I mean, you just, like, obviously you run around saying, oh, they've sold out, you say all those things, but really all you're actually saying is, God, they're successful and we're not.
I remember at a lunchtime in a pub, actually being, as it happened, it was just Jake and me, and he just sort of looked at me and said, well, we did it, didn't we? Yeah, we did.
It cost 2,000 quid to make. By the end of the year, it had cleared more than $250,000. We made the record in like 10 days in a basement. God bless Rough Trade.
A single shot rings out in a red past night, and I say, oh, 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 oh. Johnny was a good man. 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 Johnny, 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 Johnny.
As things progressed, I mean, while I loved the tour and every minute of it, other things then behind the scenes started to happen too. We started to get into that kind of rat race, that bidding race of who would sign us next, you know.
Brian didn't even tour the film material. Brian stayed to record it and then left to get married.
I made a very, very difficult phone call to Gordon and then to Jake, obviously.
We had to persuade him to stay and play on the album because we would have been really shafted.
So we had an album recorded, we had a 78 tour of Ireland booked just before Christmas 78, and no drummer. We started getting all these weird phone calls from people, one of whom turned out to be Jim Riley, who called from Sheffield. He was working as a window cleaner at the time, and he phoned Rough Trade, and as it happened, Henry was in the back room at the time and answered the phone, and there's a voice on the other end said, can I speak to somebody from Stiff Little Fingers? And Henry said, I'm with Stiff Little Fingers. He said, oh good, I'm your new drummer. And indeed he was.
Even though we'd now done one album and maybe, 6 or 7 singles, there still wasn't really a long-term plan.
When major labels started to show interest, I think it was to do with the fact that they wanted the security of it.
I think we were quite upset that they wanted to leave, and then on the other hand we thought, well, okay, you know, perhaps we don't have an international system, we don't have as many of the things to offer as perhaps someone else can, so we accepted that.
Certainly, Doug Darcy, who was the MD at Chrysalis afterwards, told me that the figures, I think, we got a gold disc, they'd sold 100,000. He said they would have shifted 250,000 of them.
He turned up to get a job, and sure he wasn't scared. So for sky apple army cap, he thought he'd be prepared. At the age of 17, he was forced to choose. At the age of 21, he's in catch-22. For just 3 years, it seemed a small amount, but they didn't tell him that the first 2 didn't count. At the age of 17, how was he to know? At the age of 21, he still had work to do. Tin soldier, he shot away his head. Tin soldier, I took the cash up there. Tin soldier, now he knows the truth.
Stiff Little Fingers never signed to Chrysalis Records. We signed a production company to Chrysalis Records, which said, we will make the record and you sell it. So you've got no say in what it sounds like, you've got no say in how it's produced.
We used the position that we had to try and get as much control as possible.
At the time, I actually remember there was a fad for hideous, coloured, stupidly shaped records. Just novelties. I mean, it was like, it was like the packaging was more important than what was in it.
The original contract said, except without the express approval of the band, all records will be black and round. So in other words, we were given complete control.
If at the age of 70 you fall in like to see, then at the age of 21 still march to this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Soldiers, it's not away your name. Tin soldiers, just cash up there. Tin soldiers, now you know the truth. Tin soldiers, it's not away you. Tin soldiers, go on trying to chew. Tin soldiers, do what they want you to. Tin soldiers, take away your name. Tin soldiers, things are all the same.
In 1980, when we got round to making Nobody's Heroes, it's the second record. Looking back on it now, I actually do feel it's pretty much of the same. We were obviously starting to play better, the production values were better, and it also gave us the breakthrough hit single at the time as well.
Back when I was younger, talking at me, never listen to what I said. Back when I was younger, talking at me, never listen to what I said. Always yapping, complaining at me. Made me think I'd be better off dead. I don't wanna talk about it, I don't wanna hear no it. Take your shit on shout about it, that's your luck, remember it.
I remember on the back of Nobody's Heroes where we were able to reprint the original rejection letter from Chrysalis.
It never occurred to me, I still had the letter, that we should have obscured my address on the letter.
The flat that he used to live in, which was bombarded with mail. I feel sorry for whatever residents were in that place.
And I'm running to the edge of that world, and the criticism something they just can't understand. Leaning on the edge of that town, and I won't be shot
sharing a flat with Gordon. One of our favourite albums at the time was an album called Lego Dub, which was like this really bizarre, out there album. And we wanted to try and recreate a bit of that in a punk rock style, which is like, just ridiculous. So we did this backing track, and we wanted to have smashing bottles on it. I want to have the bottles smashing at various points. So what we did was, at the end of the sessions, we'd saved up all the bottles of wine we'd drunk during the session. And I stood in the vocal booth with all these bottles around my legs, and a microphone in the middle, and a lump hammer. And they played, this obviously had to be a one-take deal, and they played the track to me over headphones. And I'm swinging at these bottles with a hammer in time with where I wanted the crashes to be. Not paying any attention at all to the fact that I'm now standing with loads of flying glass around me. So I walked out with like my legs covered in blood from here down and went, was that any good? Because I can't do it again.
Running to the edge of their world, and the criticizing something they just can't understand. Living on the edge of that town, and I won't be. No, I won't be. No, I won't be shut down.
We actually had written into our live contract that we were willing to stay behind as long as humanly possible to meet as many people that wanted to come meet us.
We would set up tables and we would sit there and sign autographs and chat with people.
That was part of the gig. So if anybody was promoting us or anybody was booking us, they had to be willing to put up with that.
I mean, we're talking about shows where, you know, thousands of people there, so that there'd be, I don't know how many hundreds would stay after the show.
You say let's talk of revolution, so what's new? You say let's fight it in me. You think that I've got the solution, but do you really think that's fair? Try to take control, 'cause what you see is what you get. Try to take control and not me. All right now.
There's no point at all in schlapping all the way around the country to play to people if you're not going to meet the people who are buying your records and keeping you in a job.
People were never afraid to approach them because they were very approachable.
I don't wanna be nobody's hero. I don't wanna be nobody's star. I don't wanna be nobody's hero. So get out, be what you are.
I mean, if punk rock was about anything, it was about breaking down all those barriers. So I didn't see the point in people jumping back into their fucking tour bus and fucking off without at least shaking the audience's hand.
Peace in the east, peace in the west, radicals and all the rest. I said peace up north, peace down south, peace in the ghettos all round about. We're all in one, one and all. So show away the guns and the wars are gone. Show away the hunger and the wars are gone. Show away the fighting and the wars are gone. Show away the grudges and the wars are gone.
When it started out, I always felt that punk was... It was freedom to express yourself. It was a chance to be yourself, to do what you wanted, however you wanted to do it. I mean, when we started, bands that were considered as punk bands were people, they were as diverse as Blondie, Television, the Slits, Sex Pistols, Damned, obviously, Elvis Costello. I mean, it was a really broad church, and yet they all, because of the attitude, were considered punk.
Come on, your roots, radicals you rock to the reggae roots, radicals you duck to the reggae roots, radicals you skype to the reggae roots.
By the time we got round to making Go For It in 1981, if you didn't have a Mohican and 5 studs tattooed across your fucking forehead, you weren't allowed to be in a punk band. And the whole thing had become constricted and tight and horrible. And I just wanted to carry on down the road that I started out on in what I consider to be a punk band, which was the ability and the permission, if you like, to express yourself. So if I wanted to write a pop record, I was fucked if I wasn't going to write a fucking pop record. And that's what we basically did. I mean, we went ahead and started to write pop singles at that point.
I think actually Go For It is the best album we ever made.
It's an incredibly good album. It's very strong, and you know, not unlike what The Clash did when they made London's Calling. They were moving away. They didn't want to make another punk rock album.
There was a lot of genuine love went into making of that album, and it hadn't really struck us until we played it to one or two of the guys at Chrysalis. They came down to the studio. I remember one bloke saying to me, so what I really like about it is it's so positive, it's so sort of life-affirming, and too many punk rock albums are all about, oh, isn't my life hell, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, yeah, it's called Go For It. It didn't, I don't think it ever reached the audience that it should have, because by then, the thing which had made our initial success of being very identifiable, almost like a brand, as the Northern Ireland punk rock voice of a generation thing, meant that I think an awful lot of people would have bought and liked that album, except we don't want to know another album about the Troubles and so forth.
Going into 82, we started work on the next record, but I didn't have enough songs for an album, and the record company were like clamoring for something, so they asked, you know, well, can you at least give us a single? So I said, well, let's do an EP, and that way at least, if you're going to pay the same price as a third of an album, at least you're getting a third of an album.
A day, and when we're there it always feels okay.
You used to be able to put a recommended retail price on a single, and at that point they just scrapped it. So we called the EP the £1.10 or less EP and put that on the cover, and then basically went, okay, charge more than that, you fuckers. I started writing the songs, and Jim, who's our drummer, heard the songs and decided he didn't like them. So he wanted to bail. He'd had enough, he wanted to quit.
We came to an amicable arrangement, and he agreed to do the French tour and so forth, and we all knew that was going to be his last night, and off he went.
So then we're okay, right, fine, well, we need another drummer then.
Dolphin Taylor stepped onto the throne, and we'd had some history with, because we'd toured with the Tom Robinson band that Dolphin had played with.
Because we knew him, it was like putting on an old pair of shoes. It was great. I mean, he fitted in straight away. And we did the 4-track EP.
Why don't you listen to your heart? Listen to your heart. Gotta understand.
1982 we did the Now Then record, and it was the first album we did with Dolphin.
There was nothing like that in my day. Not here in this town. Didn't let those things our way. Till we were full grown. Now they go to pubs, and you're gonna get mugged in my town.
Henry wanted to make a Ramones record. As far as I was concerned, that ship had sailed. Ali wanted to make a James Brown record. As far as I was concerned, we weren't good enough to do that. And I wanted to make an Elvis Costello record, and the others weren't interested in that.
Whatever we'd have, particularly, let's say, vis-a-vis myself and songwriting with Jake, wasn't quite working the same.
I think that's because by that stage, we'd been reasonably successful very quickly, and four of us were pulling in different directions.
How they take good and safe to drive away. Sex and late nights, and it's gotta be wrong. Is there so good?
There are people who love that album, say it is great, and there are others who can't stand it. Of course, you'll never be able to please everyone, and I think that's just a manifestation of the fact that there was more experimentation on that album, I think, than any previous one.
The songs on it weren't that great. I wasn't writing particularly well. I think when it's good, it's very, very good. And I think Bits of Kids is as good as anything we've ever done. But when it's bad, it's bloody awful.
Bits of kids, they're only bits of kids, it's always bits of kids today. She makes the breakfast waterless, all in one room. Each uncle straw keeps them ablaze. Yes, in this town.
When we went to tour the Now Then record, it was apparent that there'd been a huge sea change. I mean, we're now talking Britain in 1982.
Anyone know? 'Cause in this field, till nighttime there.
I remember Gordon telling me a story that he was in reception at Chrysalis with Rick Rogers, who was managing the Specials at the time. And the two of them were just starting talking. And Spandau Ballet walked through to sign. And Rick turned to Gordon and went, "Well, that's both of us fucked then, isn't it?" And it was pretty much true. I mean, once the New Romantic thing happened, then punk rock was as archaic as Yes had been when the Sex Pistols happened.
Bits of kids, they're only bits of kids, it's always bits of kids today.
If you look at the format of a band, it's a difficult existence. You've got four adults thrown together that don't necessarily have anything in common apart from, hopefully, love of the same kind of music, which I think we did have, even if it was just the Ramones' first album that we all agreed on.
I remember Henry turning up to do his vocal with his suitcase. He walked into the studio, under the microphone, dumped the suitcase down and said, "This better be quick, I'm on a 6:30 plane to Belfast."
Broken cities and broken hearts.
I was just as bad. I'd rather go to the pub and watch Northern Ireland play because the World Cup was on than pay attention to the record my band were supposed to be making. So we were all as guilty as each other. And I think I don't know whether we were disillusioned with Stiff Little Fingers, or I think more importantly we were disillusioned with each other.
There were fisticuffs in the band, but no injuries as far as I can recall.
You know, you do a lot of growing up between the ages of 18 and 23. And unfortunately, we didn't have the intelligence to actually do the growing up together.
Everything is only yesterday, and on the way down.
So I thought the best thing to do was to call it a day. I mean, it wasn't an easy decision to make.
It was a bit of a shock, but at the same time I could see why he wasn't happy with the way things had turned out.
And we gotta be strong, 'cause we're gonna be wrong.
Henry was always going to be the hardest to tell.
The thing about Henry was he was a very unassuming, straightforward lad, as he seemed to us at the time. I'm sure underneath that was a more complex character. But his rhythm guitar playing was phenomenal. It was like somebody scraping a bar of steel across the guitar. And that was what really gave them their electricity.
When they were living in each other's pockets, he and Henry more and more were not getting on, which is a great pity because they were very much the actual backbone of the band. Henry was as much a co-founder of Stiff Little Fingers as Jake.
I went to his room in Copenhagen before the show and said, look, this is my last show. I think we've had a decent enough run, but nobody's interested anymore. And do you really want to go back and play pubs again? Because that's what we're looking at. Because I don't. I never envisaged being in Stiff Little Fingers again. And as far as I was concerned, it was as big a dead stop as the one Paul Weller called. That was it. I was done.
Jake went off and did a thing called Jake Burns and the Big Wheel, which was in his homage to Elvis Costello and the Attractions. They brought in keyboards and trumpets and that kind of thing. Ali and Henry originally played together in a band for a little while before they went off and had this thing called Friction Groove, and Ali became a tour manager and Henry became a guitar teacher back home in Belfast, and Dolphin just kind of got into the back room side of things.
When I got a call from Ali 5 years later, I hadn't spoken to him literally at all in the interim.
They tell you not to worry. They say they're terribly sorry, but that's the way it has to be. For the likes of you and me.
Back in '87, a Tom Robinson Band reunion show that I called Jake out of the blue because we hadn't really been in touch at that stage.
I said, well, actually, I'm playing a gig tonight, so I can't come, but it's great to hear from you after all this time. Why don't we get together and have a beer?
That, I suppose, broke the ice.
We went out for a beer, and 1 beer became 6, and 6 became 7, and we started looking at all these other bands that had reformed, and it was like, well, we were fucking better than them to fucking start with. I don't know why the fuck, how can they get away with that? And before you know it, it's like, well, why don't we fucking reform, because we're fucking better than them. And what seemed like a brilliant idea when you're hammered at 11 o'clock in a pub, well, I woke up the next day to find I'd already gone home and phoned Henry up to see if he was interested.
Things are so bad, you could never make two, and there's always someone better out than you.
And got a phone call from Ali saying, yeah, Dolph's in. I'm like, Dolph's in for what? She said, reforming the band. You did phone Henry. I went, did I? All right. And turned out, yes, I did, and he was up for it as well. And before I knew it, we'd booked rehearsals, and we were going on the road again.
When he said that he was going to go back on the road to Stiff Little Fingers, I essentially said, count me out.
The people who are on top say that you should keep your chin up, and they are keen to show it. We are not the ones below you. Well, I want no more of that stuff, 'cause that's looking at it upside down. And the world has got money enough for us to make it go around.
Because they got back in contact, they decided they'd hook up anyway, and that led to the 1987 Christmas shows, which was only ever supposed to be 9 or 10 shows, finish up in Ireland and see a parents for Christmas, and it was just supposed to be that.
Ostensibly it was basically just to get back to Belfast for Christmas on a free ticket.
But, you know, as legend rightly has it, once the tickets actually went on sale, they'd gone from one set of 9 venues to the same cities but much bigger venues in about 3 weeks because the call for them when they came back was just astonishing.
Don't be told, don't be concerned, I said. Don't be rules, don't be fools, because things are so bad you could never make it.
The tour had gone from 6 shows to something like 15, all sold out. And we were terrified.
Almost like they'd never been away. They just went from one extreme to the next in about a fortnight.
Now, instead of what we were expecting to play like the Dog and Duck Walthamstow, we're now playing, you know, like the Birmingham Hummingbird, we're playing the Newcastle Mayfair, we're playing the Glasgow Barrow. 2 shows in one day at the Barrowland, both sold out. Dublin, Tivoli, Belfast, Ulster Hall, everything sold out before you go anywhere near it.
Suddenly thousands are out again.
And we're like, I don't want to make mistakes in front of all those fucking people. Let's go somewhere we never sold any fucking tickets. So we phoned the agent up and said, look, we're too scared to do this. Book us a set of shows in Germany, because we always meant shit in Germany, never sold any fucking records. Let's go to Germany. Grand. He said, how many shows do you want to do? 2 or 3. Comes back, it was about a week later, he said, you're doing 7, they're all major venues, they're all sold out. You are fucking joking, aren't you?
I wish someone better out there.
Probably for the only time in the entire history of this band we rehearsed for real, because we were terrified. And we got to Germany, and I spent the entire day before the entire afternoon before the first sound check just throwing up. I was that nervous.
There wasn't really any talk of new material, and it was pretty much just rolling out the best of. We still enjoyed playing the songs. We enjoyed the reaction, and it was seeing the reaction on everybody's faces was just incomparable. There was people they wouldn't let us not continue, really.
And so we had to decide, you know, whether the band were our future lay or not. And I actually sat down with everybody and said, look, if we're going to do this, we can't carry on being like a punk cabaret act, because that's effectively what we were at the time. I mean, it didn't matter that, you know, we did 2 nights at Brixton Academy in front of like 11,000 people. We were still ostensibly a cabaret act, because we were just playing the greatest hits. If this is going to have any future at all, and if we're serious about this, we've got to start writing songs.
Give me a country that's red, white and blue. Give me a pretty sass and true. Give me the chance to be one of you. Give me. Give me a nation where people are free. Free to do, free to be. Free to screw you before you screw me. Give me, 'cause I'm alright. I'm alright. Union Jack. Light up black. Light up black.
So having decided around 1982 that we weren't going to be a cabaret act, we finally got our act together and went back in the studio. We did a couple of demos for what became the Flags and Emblems record, and Ali decided that he didn't want to tour.
The interests that I had were taking me away from the band, and eventually, you know, had to make the decision.
Just didn't really want to throw himself right back into it head first. So off he went, and at the time I only had one name on my list, and that was Bruce Foxton. I called Bruce up. As luck would have it, he wasn't doing anything much. We basically threw him right in the deep end. Around 1994, we started work on the next album, which was the Get a Life record. By that stage, Henry had grown his hair, considerably. He turned up in Metallica t-shirts. And, I mean, I can't speak for him, but it felt to the rest of us like it was kind of it was a job as far as he was concerned. He would turn up and do it and go away again. We had to come to the painful decision to just let him go. It was much harder for me than it was for anybody else because, as I said earlier, you know, Henry and I started the thing. In the interim, of course, we finished the Get a Life album and we had to tour it. So it was written and recorded as a 4-piece rock band album, so we needed a 4th piece.
Basically asked me if I wanted to go to France for a weekend of drinking. I was up for that, so I got to learn these tunes and I'll see you at the airport. So that was the initiation.
McCallum took me at my word and got as drunk as he liked before we played the gig, which was not that clever. So we played like 3 men and a dog on the end.
We got back to the hotel and I ended up in the swimming pool and I can't swim.
I remember the poor girl coming running out from reception saying, "Please do not go in the pool this time of night, I will lose my job." And this dripping wet McCallum came out the pool going, "Ah, you're alright love, it's a fucking shit job anyway."
That was it, I was no longer in the band.
We got in touch with another old friend, Dave Sharp, who was the guitar player with The Alarm. He did 6 weeks with us. But at the time he was living in New Orleans and we were all based here and it was just, you know, a flight too far. With the next album, Tinderbox, we just did as a 3-piece. And, but with a certain Mr. McCallum being invited back to do some singing.
Jake called up and said, "Look, can you, if we asked you to come back in the band, can you behave yourself?" I said, "Of course I can behave myself."
We brought him back on the express instruction that he didn't get himself thrown in any swimming pools and get any hotel receptionist sacked. He was allowed to stay. So he's been with us ever since.
They got the money, but it don't give a damn. Guess when I get as many fast as I can. All the worries that there's none I can see. Gotta make a fast connection, then I'll be free. I gotta break out and leave this life behind. Break out and see what I can find.
We pretty much finished all the writing when I got a phone call from Dolphin saying that he wanted to quit. We'd been on the road so much. He missed his daughter growing up. He missed her first steps. We were in Los Angeles when she first took her first steps and stuff, and he'd just had a second kid. And he basically said to me, "Look, I just don't want to miss this kid growing up." I phoned up Steve Grantley, who had played drums in The Big Wheel.
I got a message left on my answer phone saying, "Steve, hi, it's Jake. Give us a quick call, would you, mate, when you got 5 minutes?"
And in the interim, he'd been in a band with Patsy Kensit, he'd played with Julian Lennon.
There was no, come and audition or, come down. There's a few other guys who were in the frame. It was just, Steve, I want you to join Stiff Little Fingers. My first gig with Stiff Little Fingers was at the Barrowlands, and Jake had phoned me up and said, do you want to do a warm-up gig or something? And me being a flash git, I went, nah, I'll be all right, because I'd done arenas and that, I wasn't that bothered. And then I stood at the side of the stage, and then the intro tape started, and all the beer started, and there's like 3,000 jocks going fucking mental, and Jake looked at me and went, bet you wish you'd had a fucking warm-up now, and I was shitting myself.
When we finished the Tinderbox record, our then manager decided to move to doing other things.
And suddenly, Jake and Bruce found themselves in a situation where there was no one to look after them.
It wasn't the right time to manage ourselves because it had been thrust upon us rather than us taking the decision to do it.
It was very tough in the first few years.
Break out!
We eventually struck a deal to make the next record with EMI. It's interesting looking at that as our first record back with EMI as compared to our first record with Chrysalis, when we held all the cards. Suddenly we held none of the cards. And yeah, it was a pretty humbling experience.
We'd do 3 tracks and go, yeah, we've done really well today, 3 backing tracks down, let's go out and get slaughtered. But then we're in the studio at 11 o'clock the next day, and I've got the headphones on with the click track going bing, 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 and I'm trying to play with this massive fucking hangover. It was a nightmare.
They had so much confidence in it, they said, well, we'll put it out, but we'll put it out with a load of greatest hits just to cover our arses because we don't actually believe in this.
We basically had to go along with it if we wanted to have a new album out, because at the time EMI didn't think that a new album by Stiff Little Fingers was viable.
In the grand tradition of the band that refuses to die, it was like we saw it as a challenge rather than a slap in the face. It was like, nah, fuck them. We'll go out on tour, we'll fucking sell out everywhere, and we'll show them that we're worth a second shot.
There was no cohesion, there was no one behind it driving it along and saying, right, we'll do this, this, this and this, and like plotting a career. I mean, that didn't happen until Alan Parker came along.
I don't say this lightly, and I wouldn't say it about too many people, but there's not a single person in that band I wouldn't take a bullet for.
I believe in the power of guitar drum. I believe in the world in a song. I believe in the music makes you strong. I believe in the power of guitar drum.
So in 2003, when we came to make the guitar and drum record, we knew that we had, as I said, friends on the inside, because by that stage we'd made more than one. And we knew we had people in there who would battle and fight our corner. And while we weren't quite in the position that we could deliver what we wanted to and expect EMI to take it, that's pretty much how it finished up being.
I believe in the power of guitar drum. I believe in the world in a song. I believe in the music makes you strong. I believe in the power of guitar drum.
You know that old expression, you should live every day like it's your last? We made that record like it was our last. We honestly believed that this is probably going to be our last shot at making a major label album. The reason the album's called Guitar and Drums is because we decided that we'd done all this, work with brass sections, we'd work with keyboard players, we'd work with backing singers, we'd done all the jiggery pokery you could do. So on that record we decided, nah, fuck it, we're going to go right back to the first album.
So much so that I didn't even do backing vocals, because on the last couple of albums I'd done lots of harmonies and all that stuff, because I can do a bit of a sting and do all those high harmonies. But on this I said, look, let's just do it as we would do it on stage.
If it's not played on a guitar, be it bass or lead guitar, rhythm guitar, whatever, if it's not hit on a fucking drum, or it doesn't come out of our mouths, it doesn't go on the record.
Let's just be the fucking tough fucking rock and roll band that we are on stage. And that's what I always wanted to recreate in the studio. And it's tough doing that, because you've got that option of putting this on and putting that on and overdubbing. But with that, we were very disciplined and kept it pared down to the bone.
I believe in the power of your drum. I believe in the rock world and the sun. I believe in the music makes you strong. In the power of your drum.
As far as I'm concerned, it's probably the best record we've ever made.
We were shocked at how good the response was and how good the reviews were and all that stuff, because we were used to getting trashed by Q and Mojo and all these people. And so when you get a good review, you have to read it again. You go, they like it.
I believe in the power of your drum. I believe in the rock world and the sun. I believe in the music makes you strong. I believe in the power of your drum.
Well, promoting guitar and drum was a massive, daunting project. And I think it started to take its toll on everybody.
We had tantrums, we had fights, and it started to get back to what it was like before the Now Then breakup. Just simply through pressure of work. When we got to the end of that year, Bruce let it be known to me that he'd kind of had enough. He just wasn't willing to work like that.
Who do you get to replace a bass player as good as that?
I had one geezer in mind, and that was Ali McMordy. And as far as I was concerned, he was the only man who could do the job.
I only phoned up to say, like, do you want to come back and do one tour? And that was over a year ago, and we still haven't got rid of him.
But he's been gone for 20 years, and those 20 years have just disappeared. It's like he's always been there.
Here we are, 2007, and the band are still as strong and as popular as ever.
Guess who just got back today? And why that boys to the blue wing?
Well, as far as the longevity of the band goes, never say never.
They would ask you if you were around, how you were, so you could.
At the end of the day, the reason that people go and see the Stiffs play is because they've got the songs and they're a great live band.
I think they've still got that street thing, and I think that's what breeds that kind of passion.
The boys are back in town, boys are back in town. The boys are back in town. The boys are back in town.
Although it was particular in some ways to Belfast and Northern Ireland, it's a kind of universal struggle.
Remember that chick who used to dance a lot? Every night she'd be on the floor shaking what she got.
I mean, every young kid wants to break out of his environment. Everybody should be what they want to be and be given the opportunity to do those things without fear of being repressed by anybody or anything.
He had a belief, you know. I mean, it wasn't a career, you know, it was a statement of intent.
It would actually break my fucking heart if we were ever dishonest just to try and sell a record. I don't see the point in it, and it's not what we're about. And I think that's why people keep coming back, because they know they're going to be fucking lied to.
It's fucking great sitting on the stage playing those fucking songs with those guys. I don't want to be anywhere else. Being a drummer in Stiff Little Fingers is fucking cool.